Well, right now, we're bringing in Yvonne Davis. She's our international relations expert, and you were also a special appointee to President George W. Bush, but you had a lot of interaction with the entire family.
Of interaction. It was very emotional for me behind the scenes, so I'm glad I had time to kind of collect myself just to see this historical moment, and it's a pleasure to be here at this historical time to talk about a family man who was a man of faith, family, and fortitude at this time.
What did he mean to you? You said it was hard.
Oh, I mean, he's just like, he was funny, a good listener. The thing about President George H.W. Bush that everyone has now learned, and he never liked to use the word I. He never was, John Meacham wrote a tremendous book about him. And he talked about, at one point, the speechwriters took the word I out. So whatever he did, he just didn't like that. He'd rather be more self-effacing and give credit to others. But clearly this was a man who was prepared to do the job as president, UN ambassador, CIA head. Yep. He special envoy to China. He was prepared to be a president, a foreign policy president, and he was probably the last of the great foreign policy presidents.
Yeah, but his political resume. I mean, we didn't even get to most of it, right? He was first elected, I believe, to the U.S. House of Representatives back in 1966. Of course, coming from a political family, Prescott Bush, a U.S. senator from here in Connecticut as
connection is very deep. And so these were some of the things that I experienced firsthand. The first time I met him was in September of 1998 in Houston. I think I was telling the two of you in the break, I had on a cowboy hat and a suede cowboy hat, suede boots and skirt, and he loved it. He said, "Oh wow, you look great, you look beautiful," and he smacked the hat down, and the hat came down to my eyes. And so I've been trying to find the picture, but there's a picture of me with the family with my eyes covered. And it was just a moment where you're like, and it was just him. I said, wow, the 41st president of the United States just did that. That's so cool.
On the back, right?
Yeah, like the hat going down. And so it showed me the human side of this president. And so with all the pomp and circumstance and the dignified way of which he's being laid to rest today, to know that there was this other side to him is just remarkable.
Of course, as you're watching now, as we're listening to you, Yvonne, the President and First Lady, making their way into the Washington National Cathedral. While this is happening, one thing I wanted to ask, because you've had some interactions with both Bush 41 and Bush 43, what similarities in their personality and in their temperament? I know we can talk foreign policy, but as people, because we're never going to get the chance to experience.
President George W. Bush was known as a compassionate conservative, and so was his father. They're both men of faith. There's a strong belief in God, in Christianity. In terms of moral fiber and moral character, everyone makes mistakes, but in terms of the life of a family and what was most important, President George W. Bush never made you choose in that context. Both men honored the country and lived distinguished as presidents. Both presidents put country first. And then work towards bipartisanship. And President George H.W. Bush did a tremendous job doing that. And he did that so well as it relates to foreign policy. When Gorbachev was in his declining years of power at the fall of the Soviet Union, he helped Gorbachev save face. And he ushered in the transition with the fall of the Berlin Wall. He did things, he completed that process with such grace and dignity. I read a comment that Vladimir Putin put on his website about how the relations between Russia and the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, was with the United States was stronger. So there were so many things that this president did that he was very underrated as it relates to things, even on a domestic level, raising more than $50 million for the United Negro College Fund, the Bush family giving money to black colleges. So many things that you would just want to categorize or criticize him for. And there are things you could do that, but this is not the day for that. This is a day of celebration of a man of distinct and distinguished character and honor.
And we are going to continue to do that as we watch here in Washington. But just a few moments ago, Matt Caron spoke with Governor Dannel Malloy regarding the moment of silence for the president. And we're going to listen into that right now.
Well, we're inside the Legislative Office building where a moment of silence, a minute of silence actually, was just held for the late 41st President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. That was an executive order that was signed by Governor Dannel Malloy. And joining me now is Connecticut's Governor Dannel Malloy. Thanks for joining us. Nice to see you. Governor, what will you remember most about George Herbert Walker Bush?
You know, I went to see the president speak in Stamford when he was running for president, just out of curiosity. And it struck me when he was speaking on the stage that he was a very decent human being and hardworking and earnest. And had found ways to evolve over a long period of time. I think all of us would like to evolve as much as the president was able to do over his 94 years of life. And you know, this is a historic moment. There's only been two families that produced a father-son presidency. I didn't necessarily agree with all of their policies, but I understood the family to be a good and decent family. Actually, I know a lot of the Bushes from Greenwich. I went to school with some of the nephews and nieces, and so this is we mark now the transition, final transition of the World War II generation to subsequent generations.
Governor Dannel Malloy, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Governor George Herbert Walker Bush was indeed a son of Connecticut, raised on Grove Lane in Greenwich. And Greenwich is actually exploring the possibility of a monument or memorial to honor the 41st president. President Bush also went to Yale, where he got an economics degree, captain of the baseball team there. Connecticut was also where President Bush met his wife, Barbara, of more than 70 years. He was a Navy aviator. He enlisted after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and he led the United States through what was a very turbulent time, including transitioning out of the Cold War. So today, again, a national day of mourning. We're remembering the life and legacy of the nation's 41st president. There will be a memorial service held for him inside of the National Cathedral. He was laying in state for several days inside the Capitol Rotunda, as is tradition. And today, because it is a national day of mourning, flags are flying at half-staff across the state. This moment of silence was observed at public schools and municipal governments across the state today. And we will continue to cover the life and legacy of the nation's 41st president. For now, reporting live in Hartford, inside the Legislative Office building, Matt Caron, Fox 61 News.
Matt, thank you so much. That's another thing we want to mention. By far, they set the record, George and Barbara Bush did, for the longest-lived presidential marriage. And boy, Yvonne Davis, wasn't that just a famous love story between the two of them?
Yeah,
they were enamored with each other.
Yeah, and the loyalty, the fierce loyalty and commitment to each other. Loyalty is a characteristic that permeated through the whole Bush apparatus, the whole Bush family, and it started with the matriarch and patriarch of the Bush family, and I witnessed it for myself. I witnessed it for myself with regards to President George Herbert Walker Bush, First Lady Barbara Bush. I witnessed it also with President George W. Bush and also First Lady Laura Bush. So in terms of the importance and value of family and being an example for the nation is very critical. And it's something in our time that we need to learn today, as this nation has been just unfortunately so divided. And if the death of this president could be a message for all of us that we can be kinder and gentler, is what he said, or a point of light for our character, then I think that the nation can rise to the greatness that it needs to become. And I'm hoping that these are the lessons and it's not short-lived.
And that was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what he was referring to in his famous 1,000 Points of Light speech. Those Points of Light were volunteer organizations.
Yes.
Those were clubs, all different small organizations throughout the country, just trying to do the good work in whatever small way they could.
And from Connecticut, Joe Young was a receiver of President George H.W. Bush's official letter as a point of light, and he received it right here in Hartford, Connecticut.
I did not
so
know
there's
that.
always a connection that the Bushes always recognize the unsung heroes. When I look at my life and my career, there is no way I could have done the things I've done if it wasn't for a family or that believed in giving an opportunity to myself. So I'm forever grateful for that. And so I think that these are the things that make it a special occasion for me and for so many others.
And for those joining us right now, maybe they're not familiar, your connection with the Bush family, take us back to how that happened, how that came to
Well, I was involved in politics here, and I had expressed to a gentleman who was a mentor of mine, actually a Democrat, Ron Williams, that I wanted to be involved. And so there was a gentleman from Houston that said, you know, we got this great governor who I knew because he was a part owner of the Texas Rangers. So I enjoyed that, although that wasn't my team. But I saw that he was kind of had that swagger. I said, who's this guy? So I was invited in September of 1998 to come to Houston, Texas. And I did.
And you met the Bushes.
And I met the Bushes. And I remember then Governor Bush said, Yvonne, Bud, because I was nicknamed Bud after that, I want you on my team.
Okay.
And the embrace, I said, wow, what a team. And it was quite an experience. And so there's just countless memories when I was in Africa receiving things from the White House signed by President Bush, and so many experiences. I could go on and on and on and on that really contributed a lot. And the bipartisan efforts that we did in that regard was critical.
Of course, your former boss, George W. Bush, is scheduled to give one of the eulogies. He's scheduled to eulogize his father. As you can see, the motorcade has now arrived at the Washington National Cathedral as we are preparing for the casket to come out. Here is the full list of eulogists here for the president today during this state funeral. We have John Meacham, the presidential historian, Brian Mulroney, a former Canadian prime minister, former Senator Alan Simpson, and then, of course, our 43rd president, George W. Bush.
Yes.
Okay, once again, the motorcade arriving here at Washington National Cathedral. We are awaiting the moment where the casket is going to come out, and of course there is going to be, I don't know if pomp and circumstance is the right word, if that's too celebratory, but of course there's a very formal event scheduled for that we're just going to want to let play out without talking over that. What kind of a job, while we have some time, Yvonne, do you think that W is going to do here, eulogizing his father?
I think the biggest thing, that knowing the personality, is that he can steady his emotions and not lose it. As we've seen over the last few days, even right now as we look at the screen, and I watched him, that's what made me get emotional backstage, was to watch, you know, he's doing all he can to hold back the tears. Yeah. So whatever message that he has to give in memory or celebration of his father's life and legacy, it would probably be to just not completely lose it. He has the strength in his wife, Laura Bush, which is a steady hand in his life. So I'm sure he will draw upon that and his family. But I think that will be, because now he is in the role of the patriarch of the Bush family, you know, as a former president and a leader of the family. So this is probably weighs just very heavy on his heart. I've seen this president become emotional in person before, and of course we've all watched on television. So this family, the men in the family, the Bushmen are criers. So they were never ashamed of shedding a tear.
No shame in that.
And so I think that's a great message, that emotions are high here, and this is a real family. I mean, yes, the dynasty that people may talk about, or the royalness of the family, of the name in America, but at the end of the day, this is an American family that has an American story.